What's going on, guys? It's Danny Do It All, and today I'm going to be showing you how to change valve cover gasket on a 2006 Ford Fusion. Alright, so if you don't know what a valve cover is, this is your valve cover right here, this big plastic piece, and there's a gasket that's underneath this valve cover that goes onto the head of the motor. And what it does is it just prevents any oil from leaking between the valve cover and the head. And mine is leaking right back here, right above the exhaust manifold. So the way I found out that my valve cover gasket was bad was that I was actually sitting at the light the other day and started smelling a burning oil smell while I was sitting there with the AC on and the air coming in from outside. And the reason that I was getting that burning oil smell is because right here, right below the valve cover, the gasket was leaking right here, and it was leaking down onto my exhaust manifold and burning off that oil, and then it was getting sucked back into the clean outside air into the cabin. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to change that out. Alright, so our first step in removing this valve cover is going to be to remove this air duct that goes over the valve cover. So we're going to have about three 10 millimeter bolts. One's here, and then we have two right back here. Alright, then we have the two that are on the back here. And two. Alright, so once we have the three bolts out, just lift up on this air duct, straight up, and then put it off to the side. So next we're going to go ahead and remove the plugs from our coils here. So go ahead and press down on these tabs. So press down and pull out. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, all the plugs are disconnected. Then there's an 8 millimeter bolt that holds each of these down. As you guys are working, just make sure that you put your bolts in a safe location, put them off to the side. So now we're going to go ahead and remove these coils. So just give them a little twist, gently pull up on them. You see that one right there? That one's full of oil inside the spark plug well because we have a bad valve cover gasket. And we're going to go ahead and solve that issue as well. And here's another one here. And that one's dry. So the two inner wells have oil down in them. Alright, we're also going to remove this plug here. So press in on the tab and pull out on the plug. That. Alright, so now we're going to remove our PCV hose right here, which runs from the valve cover gasket all the way here to your air inlet for your engine. Alright, so to remove this PCV hose, this is the front part of it that connects to the air inlet. There's this little the green clip. So what you do is put a finger or a flathead down here, and what you do is you open it up and then wiggle this and slide it back. Now it's loose. Alright, the rear one's the same thing. We're going to press on that tab to open up the green plastic, and then we're going to wiggle it and pull back on the hose. Alright, then you can just turn that out of the way. Alright guys, so now I have a flathead screwdriver. You can use a flathead or you can use a little prying tool. And we're going to go ahead and remove this wiring harness that runs next to the valve cover gasket, and that is held on to the bolts. So we're just going to put our flathead underneath here and just pry up on these, and they'll slide right up. So These are loose on this side. I'm gonna go ahead and take this plug off as well. So press in on this little tab and then slide it out like that. Okay, we also have the 4 plugs that go to the fuel injectors that we're gonna remove. Again, same thing, press in on little tabs and then pull them up gently. Give them a little wiggle as you pull them up. And if you can, reach underneath the plug with your finger and pull up on it. Alright, that's our 4 plugs for the injectors out of the way. We're also going to go ahead and remove this plug here. Okay guys, now we're going to take off this center plug here. Got my flathead. I'm going to go ahead and reach underneath this rubber grommet here. Lift up on it. Gently lift up so that it exposes the plug. Look for the side that the tab is on so you can press it in. Looks like it's over here. I'm going to reach in with my flathead and press that tab in. And then lift up on the plug. It comes right out. Move that off to the side. Alright. Okay, now I'm going to get the rest of this wiring harness off of this side. So you can pull up on this one or reach underneath with your flathead to get underneath it. Kind of pull up on that. This one back here. Wiggle that up and get that out of the way. Got this metal bracket. You can just take that off of the bolt that's in the back. Got another one here. It's held onto this screw. Little plastic plug here. Alright, now it's completely disconnected from the valve cover. So if you need to, you could use a little cable tie, kind of just pull this out of the way and just leave it out of the way. Just be gentle with your wiring harness just to make sure you don't break any wires. Okay. Alright guys, now because we had these 2 inner wells that were flooded with oil because of a bad gasket, I'm going to go ahead and use my little turkey baster here and try to draw up as much of that oil that's in there. And put it into a drain pan here. And if you have like a small tube or a little pump that you could use, you use that. It'd probably work better than this turkey baster, but this is the only thing that I have on hand currently. And that seems like that's most of the oil down in there. Just want to try to avoid getting a lot of oil down into the cylinder. Alright, so at this point we've taken everything off. We've taken all the plugs off. This valve cover is just about ready to come off. But before we start loosening any of these bolts, what we want to do is, if you have an air compressor, you want to go ahead and blow off any dirt and debris that's in here, in these wells, along the edges, just to make sure we don't get any dirt or contaminants down into the engine. So I don't have an air compressor with me, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a vacuum. I'm actually using a shop vac. You can use your house vacuum. And I'm going to be using a little brush. So I'm going to be vacuuming and kind of just dusting off the dirt and sucking up any dirt that I find on the edges and in this inside area here, just to make sure we don't get anything down into the engine. Alright, so now that everything is cleaned up, use a vacuum, I use a brush to get all the little dirt and debris that were on the edges and on the inside here. We're going to go ahead and remove these 8mm bolts, or these nuts that are attached to these bolts that hold down this valve cover. So you have these that go around the edges here, and then you have these 2 that are located here on the inside. So you got actually 1, 2, and then this one's on the outside here. So we're going to go around and start loosening these up now. Alright guys, now we got all the bolts loose and this valve cover is ready to come up. So what we're going to do is, what I like to do is either get a flathead screwdriver or a prying tool. And there's a couple areas where you're going to want to pry up on this. So one area is right here. So, and also when you're prying up, just make sure that whatever you're prying on is not a delicate piece. Make sure it's, you know, a piece of aluminum or a piece of engine that isn't going to break. Make sure you're not breaking any plugs or anything like that. I also like to go ahead and reach over here with my hand. I like to kind of pull forward and then up slightly so that, you know, you can get it unstuck that way too. So kind of like that. So now it's loose on the back. Take my prying tool here on the front and then get underneath here and then pry up like that. So that's, now it's loose and it's ready to come up. So what we're gonna do is, now it's all loose, make sure that you do remove your dipstick and take it out of there and put that in a safe location. Just make sure everything is out of your way. Make sure no dirt is gonna fall in there. And then kind of gently lift straight up. If you need to wiggle it a little bit. And we'll pull this off to the side. Alright guys, so we're doing great. We're just about halfway there. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to take some clean paper towels. I'm going to finish drying up this oil and liquid that's in these wells here. Just so that when I do a spark plug change, that these will be nice and dry for next time. Alright guys, so that's pretty much cleaned up in there. You guys might be thinking, why am I not using any gloves? Unfortunately, I did just recently run out of gloves and I don't have any. You guys do want to be using gloves when you're dealing with used oil. So just keep that in mind. And so now the next step that I'm going to be working on is I'm going to be cleaning all of these edges where the new gasket is going to mate up to the head here. So still got a piece of gasket stuck here. Pull it off, remove it to the side. And so you could use some like a paper towel, and you could use some rubbing alcohol or some acetone to kind of just clean up all these surfaces. And we just want to get them really clean so that we get a really good seal with our new gaskets and so that we don't get any leaks. So I'm going to go ahead and go all the way around and clean this all up. Alright guys, so we got this all nice and cleaned up. All the mating surfaces are nice and clean. Now we're going to go ahead and work on the valve cover and putting the new gaskets on that valve cover. In the meantime, just to make sure nothing gets in here, I'm just going to cover this up with some paper towels just so nothing falls down in there while we're working on the valve cover. One thing that I want to point out is right here where the timing chain cover mates to the engine. So there's a kind of like a little crack here where these two pieces are put together, and from factory what they do is they put a little bit of RTV here. So just make sure that you guys get that all cleaned off of the front and off of the back here. Just make sure it's a nice clean surface, and then when we reapply the valve cover, we're gonna go ahead and put some fresh RTV on there just to make sure we don't get any leaks and we're good to go. Alright, so we got our valve cover here on the bench, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and remove the old gasket off of this valve cover. So grab yourself a little flathead or a little pick and then reach in here and pull up on this gasket, and then you can pull it out with your hand. Alright, pull it off, put that to the side. And this one was the one that was stuck onto the car. So now we're just going to go ahead and take a little bit of paper towel, take a little cleaner, and we're going to clean out all these grooves just to make sure there's no dirt or contaminants in there that could cause a leak. Alright, so now we got all our grooves nice and clean. Now it's going to be time to go ahead and install our new gasket. So, I'll start with these two little ones here. As you can see, they're slightly different because one has a little bolt hole here. So this one goes right over here on the little bolt hole. I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there. Press it down. Put this one over here on this side. Alright, so it might just take a little time to see exactly the way this gasket goes on, but a good thing that helps you find out where to put the gasket is, you'll see this little part right here. It's a little kind of a little thicker right there, so that's going to line up over here on this section or over here on this section. So then that's right where the valve, where the timing chain cover mates up with the engine, so it gets this little bit of a thicker piece of gasket there. So look for the two pieces that are thicker, which are right here and right here. Alright, so we got the new gaskets in place. Just make sure they're seated in there properly. Make sure you have them lined up correctly. So I'm going to take a little bit of fresh oil that I have, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of oil on these new seals. Alright, so this is ready to go back on the car. So with these valve cover gaskets, I've done about 2 or 3 of them. We have 2 Ford Fusions in our family. So what happens is, especially near the back, like I was saying, over that the exhaust manifold, the heat rises up, and what it does is over, all that heat and the different heat cycles, as it goes through all those heat cycles, the gasket starts to get hard and it can get brittle. And so once it gets hard like that, it doesn't create a good sealing surface, and then the oil starts to leak out. Alright, so let's go get this on the car. Alright, our last step before we put our valve cover on is going to be to add some of this RTV. So again, we're going to put it right here. So we're just going to put a little dab. We don't need much on there, just a tiny bit. That is plenty there. And then we're going to put a little bit right back here as well. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and get ready to install this valve cover with our new gaskets on there. So it's just going to be the opposite of what we just did. Go ahead and line this up. Make sure all the wires are out of the way. And just be very careful as you're lining this up. Alright, that's in place. Make sure all your bolts line up. And we're just going to go ahead and screw these in by hand for now. Alright, now that we've tightened these down by hand, we're going to go ahead and tighten them down to specs. The specs are 89-inch pounds, so unfortunately I do not have my torque wrench, but I am going to go ahead and just use a regular wrench. I'm not going to tighten them down that much. We're going to go ahead and start with the inside screws here, and then we're going to work our way out. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten these center ones down here. Then we're going to work our way out here. And then go diagonally across. Then we'll come here. So what I basically did was I worked from the inside and then towards the outside. So I started here and then I worked my way to the outsides diagonally, going towards the outside edges to make sure we get a good seal on all the gaskets. Alright, so we are almost done. So let's go ahead and put your dipstick back in. down in there, and then we're gonna go ahead and start reconnecting all these wires, connecting all the plugs back in. So we're gonna go ahead and take your injector wires, your injector plugs, and we're gonna plug those back in now. What I did was I also removed these two clips right here, just so that it was more out of the way. So I'm gonna put those back in as well. These go down into your injectors. When you're pressing these back in, make sure you hear the click to make sure it goes all the way in. And put this plug back in. Pull this rubber back a little bit. Alright, make sure you get it all the way in, hear that click. Rubber back on. This little plug here. Plug here. And then we're going to go ahead and start putting our wiring harness back on to the bolts. So, go ahead. Same thing over here. You got this little clip here. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and put our coils back in place. Just press them down. Make sure they're all the way in. If you need to, turn them a little bit. Just one. Alright, with the screws again, make sure that you start off by hand tightening these. Just want to make sure we don't cross thread anything when we're working with cars, just because it's a pain to fix. Put our plugs back in place. Remember, listen for that click. Oh, that one went in and just didn't hear it click actually. There's that one. That one. Alright, and those are in place. Alright, now we're going to take our PCV hose and we're gonna plug that back in. All you gotta do is just press it in and it'll snap in place. Just make sure that both sides are lined up. That's snapped in there, and then it'll snap here in the front as well. And that's snapped in. Now we're ready to go on to our next step. And our last step is to put our air duct back in for our alternator. So just go ahead and line that up with the bolts. Make sure that you do have this bracket on this bolt underneath the air duct. Okay, we'll put our nuts back in over here. Alright, and then put our screw back in over here on this side. Now that we got everything back together, everything's back in place, go ahead and just double check your work. Make sure that you have all your plugs back in. Make sure that all your screws are tight. Make sure your PC valve is in, and you'll be good to go. Go ahead and start your engine just to make sure that you don't have any leaks. So go ahead and run it for a few minutes and just inspect around the valve cover gasket for any leaks. Alright guys, if you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I have a lot more videos coming soon. Please consider hitting that like button, and thank you for watching.